Hello and welcome to Art Chat number 3. I'm here today, Noah Bradley, with Adam Paquette.
That's me.
Yeah. So Darren is mysteriously vanished. We'll see what his excuse is, but whatever he posts online is totally true. He's not lying at all.
I'll be your token Australian for today.
Yeah, he's got the funny voice this time.
Yeah.
I'm the normal guy. So we're going to be talking about some magic stuff, because we go through a lot of magic art, and we'll be talking about a little bit of work-life balance and some traveling stuff. But before we get to any of that, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Adam Paquette. I do magic cards and other illustration, and I've been doing that for about 10 years now. A mix of card art, book covers, film work, occasionally video game stuff. And I also do my own personal fine art stuff and occasionally sell that. And I do a bit of writing as well. And I'm based in Melbourne, Australia, same as Noah right now.
Cool. So probably what everyone wants to hear about is magic, because everyone loves magic, and everyone right now mainly knows you for magic stuff. So let's go with the question that we all get asked a million times. And how'd you get started?
All right. Okay, so I was doing D&D work first, which I think is or has been a fairly common thing for magic artists. And I was doing maybe 3 years of that, or 2 years of that before I started magic. And I met Jeremy Jarvis, the art director for magic, at a painting at masterclass, actually, in Amherst. And he was a guest lecturer there, and we spoke about me wanting to do magic and being a little bit concerned about my lack of figure work in my folio. And so he helped me out by starting me off as a land card artist.
Yeah.
And then I worked my way up from there. So the first gig that I did for them was concepting Innistrad.
Oh, cool.
While I was on the road in the back of an RV. So that was already kind of like kicking off the travel work balance scenario. And then from there I started doing sets.
Nice.
I've been ever since.
Nice. So what was the first set that you worked on?
Innistrad.
That was the first cards as well? Okay.
Yeah,
gotcha.
so I think like, I was doing the concepting and then I got home and I think sort of like 3 months after I started the concepting, we started the cards.
Nice.
And yeah, the first card I ever painted was the island from Innistrad, the one with the ship in it.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
And you've been working for magic ever since, so that's what,
yeah,
4 or 5
I don't
years
think
now?
yeah, it was 2009 I think.
Wow. So yeah, about 5 years ago.
So I don't think I've missed a set yet.
They must really like you.
What about you? Which set did you start?
I came in on M13, so I've been doing it for about 3 years now. So I just missed the end of Innistrad.
Yeah.
I came in right at the end of it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they've been wonderful. Do you enjoy working for Magic?
Yeah. I like it on a lot of different levels, and I feel like my experience has shifted with it, and the things that I get from it and the things that I enjoy have changed over time.
Yeah.
At the start, I think I really saw it as a rite of passage, and a lot of my favorite artists were doing magic work, and there was a sense of wanting to kind of play in that arena.
Right.
It was kind of a recognition thing and a validation of where my skills were at.
Yeah.
And also subject matter wise, I was a lot more interested in it than from just a purely subjective sense.
Yeah.
And then as time has gone on, I've worked with magic in terms of my lifestyle and how it supports what I do.
Right.
And also I've started to use it in more of a conscious way to learn in a technical sense. So it's moved from just making cool images into using it as a platform to explore specific things that I want to get better at, and kind of tailoring each reaction to a brief in order to work with a specific problem that I'm trying to improve at.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to do, because I mean, I know for myself, if I'm not careful, work like that can become very routine. Of like, I'll do this just like I've always done it. I'll solve the problem just how I always solve the problem.
Yeah.
And I think it is a good thing to remember that you need to be pushing yourself to try new things, to explore new territory.
Yeah.
And one thing I've seen with like your work over the years is that you've pushed out of your environment place to more figurative and more figurative work. And I can definitely relate to that, but how has that been for you?
It's still tough, actually. I think I actually enjoy, I could probably say objectively that I enjoy figure work now more than I do landscapes, but I still feel more confident with the landscapes. I think every year that's gone by, I've become more and more interested in figurative painting and my fine art as well, and the artists that I've been looking at. And so when I do get a character brief, there's a mixture of, you know, am I going to mess this up? You know, are my skills up to this? But at the same time, it's kind of something that is actively moving towards what I want to do in my fine art. So I still think that I have pretty obvious weaknesses in that area from an artistic perspective. Maybe things that don't necessarily affect the card art, maybe at that size as much. But I definitely don't consider myself an anatomist like some of the other guys working for Magic Art. So and I don't think that I need necessarily to get to that level either. I'm kind of happy, you know, being able to tell a story and communicate ideas through figures rather than focus on the figures as an aesthetic statement in themselves.
I think it's fair to say we'll never be as good figurative painters as other guys. We'll always be less than them, but because I can definitely relate myself in that, you know, my figures, when I first started doing them, were little tiny dots in the landscape and have slowly gotten bigger and bigger. And you know, now they're like, you know, maybe a quarter of the card. So eventually Jeremy will trust me with a full-on character card. But,
I mean, I think like the first real kind of full character-focused card I did was Varol's, which was from the Ravnica set. And I kind of did that from sort of, like I think legs up, like thigh up or something like that. And you know, it was kind of fly swatted. You know, there wasn't a lot of overlap going on. The pose wasn't very dynamic, but it was. And the other thing about figure work is that I tend to use reference for figure work, and I never do for landscape stuff. So there is it's actually quite fun to start working from reference in that way and actually have a relationship between your imagination and the reference, rather than just this constant outpouring of imagination stuff. So that's fun, just in a basic sense of you know, having a clear task in front of you to solve. So
And for the reference, do you shoot your own reference, or
I sometimes shoot myself for reference. I don't exactly have like a magic heroic level body to shoot, so it's usually I shoot myself for kind of like the dynamic or the gesture. And then I'll kind of like hack on some bodybuilder bits, you know, like on top of my body, which will never be seen in public ever. It's usually a bit of a mash together of things.
Nice. And you now like the figurative work more than the...
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that it's kind of like fresh ground again. You know, it's sort of like the feeling that I got at the start when I was just trying to solve, you know, putting a beautiful picture in that card frame. This is now, you know, I've gotten used to that composing method, and now it's this fresh challenge of you know, how do I position a character, how close in am I, and what's the, you know, and also just seeing how much variation there is in that. And you know, I used to kind of look at all the character work, and it's sort of all read as the same pose to me. I kind of felt like it was all very similar. And then when you start to do it, you realize just how much variation there is amongst all these character artists in terms of, you know, just dropping the camera a bit or switching the lighting around. And you know, it's kind of infinite, the variety that you can get just in a character right in front of the camera. So.
It is really refreshing, I found, because like, I mean, we've both gotten to the point where we can paint a pretty decent landscape, and like it's gonna look good. But there is this fresh challenge of like trying to figure out how to do all that stuff with a figure. It's a whole new thing.
And I feel like there's a really exciting thing that happens when you switch your focus from one of those subject matters to another, and then you work on the other one for a little while, and then you come back and you address your landscape work again. And I've found that I've started sort of consciously giving kind of figurative gestural impressions to the landscape, like actually thinking about it as a body, thinking more about movement and balance and how a figure would lead your eye through a composition, and trying to do the same thing with a static landscape. So I've noticed things like my trees start to bend and move more now, instead of just being these kind of static pine trees, things like that. So that's really good. And then vice versa, you know, you go back to the landscape work, and then you do your figurative work, and you start to bring more atmosphere and more sort of subtle texture work into the figure stuff. So I think I'd like to keep doing both. You know, I don't think I'll ever switch to one and stick there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about technical stuff. You do all your stuff digitally, right? For the most part.
Yep.
as far as magic goes.
Yep.
And then, how were you trained? Were you trained digitally or oils, or what'd you do?
No, I started art school and quit art school twice.
Nice.
So I started a Bachelor of Digital Media in Sydney, and about 6 weeks, I think, into that course, Massive Black, I think it was Massive Black, or it might have just been conceptart.org at that point, did their first workshop in Amsterdam. So I spent all of my savings that I'd accumulated during school and flew over there and did, I think, about 2 weeks in Amsterdam, and I met, you know, a whole bunch of the guys, Kevin Llewellyn. All those guys. Kevin Llewellyn was definitely the biggest influence on me, and I spoke to them about the curriculum and what was on offer at that school, and they just politely, you know, suggested that I decline further education.
Right.
And they kind of gave me a bit of a roadmap of what to study on my own, what books to get, blah, blah, blah. And so I came back, did that for the rest of that year, felt bad that I wasn't going to school, so I went back and did a year of graphic design, and got to the end of that still dissatisfied with it. And at that point I was starting to get freelance work, so I just decided not to get myself into any more debt. And I left and I started doing this, well, not exactly this, but you know, website illustrations for website things like that. And then my education from there on was mainly online stuff, you know, buying every DVD I could get my hands on, holiday workshops, lots of life drawing, pretty much whatever I could get my hands on in Australia. Julian Ashton's in Sydney, for anyone that's based there, is a really good school, some really great teachers there. David Briggs, colour master. So yeah, they helped me out a lot, but for the most part, you know, just travelled a lot, went to a lot of workshops, like masterclass, and schooled myself that way.
That's good. And you're happy with how your education?
Yeah, very much so. I think I if anything, I miss, or I feel like I might have missed out on art history, some of the theoretical stuff, especially as I move from illustration into more fine art and personal work. I feel like I'm missing a little bit of a context of all those different movements, and especially what contemporary and modern art is all about. Yeah. And I think, like a lot of illustrators, when I was younger, I had a bit of a stigma around modern art and some of the more conceptual stuff. And I feel like that can be a real hindrance if you let that kind of dictate where you focus. So I think, if anything, I would have liked to have a little bit more of a grounding in that, and an understanding of what's happened in say, like the last 100 to 150 years. And maybe the other thing that I missed out on was probably like studio practice and practical things like stretching your own canvas and just handling the materials, which I've had to learn on my own, and it's probably taken a little bit longer. And limited my sense of freedom with painting for a little while. But you just push on through that, and you just, you know, follow what feels right, and you get there in the end. So I definitely don't regret it.
That's good, because I mean, like, those two things are definitely things I see a lot of artists online struggling with that are trying to make their own educations. They don't really have, there's no clear like art history education available online. There's a lot of like digital painting stuff available online, but as far as art history goes, there's just not as much. It's a little hard to pursue and probably a little less interesting for most people. And then as far as the actual studio practice stuff, it does seem like there's a lack of that, and partially because students are more inclined to just stick with digital. I think I see a lot of people that just don't even try to do traditional media anymore. Because they start doing the digital stuff and then just get hooked into it, and it's just too much trouble to get out your paints and like mess around with them.
Well, I think that's one of those, I mean, it's a question that I don't think will ever disappear for me, and that's that kind of, why do I oil paint? You know, what is there some mysterious magical thing in this that is as powerful as I feel like it is, or is this just hanging on to something that will eventually go the way of the dinosaurs? And it's something that I thought I would have solved by now, but it's not. I mean, I come back to oil painting all the time because I love it, but I don't really know why. And sometimes that question comes to the forefront and demands to be answered and justify, you know, why are you doing this? Why am I doing this? Why am I spending this time? And then if I actually just drop that question, I realize how much I like it, and I kind of don't care why, and so I do it. But I do feel like maybe that has something to do with not having done the art history and that kind of theoretical background, because it's kind of a way for me to connect to that history. So, you know, I travel, I go to the same spots that other people painted, I look at what palettes they use, and I try and kind of connect myself to that 19th century painting tradition. and that kind of is more of a physical way of understanding your connection to the history rather than a theoretical one. It's kind of like, what did it feel like to stand here?
Right.
What would this scene have looked like, you know, without telegraph poles?
Sure.
You know, that kind of feeling of understanding why they were doing what they were doing.
Right.
And that's kind of an education in itself. So.
Yes. Yeah. Cool. So let's talk a little bit more about transitioning to personal work and fine art and stuff like that, because you've done the magic thing for years now, and lately you've been pushing more and more towards your own fine art, working on personal work. Let's talk a little bit about that, as far as like why you're doing it, what you're interested in talking about with your work. Yeah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess it's always been happening. I think that's what I'm realizing now, is that it's not, and I don't think it is for most people, ever a matter of suddenly switching, or even, you know, kind of planning and building up to a point at which you switch. I feel like the personal work is kind of your natural, spontaneous desire to create things that mean something to you. And it's very hard to, you know, serendipitously connect to a client that is going to just straight up let you paint whatever you want straight from your heart. And even if they do, it's still going to be shifted in its context, how it's provided to the public as a product or whatever. So I think that it's not so much a shift into personal art as the personal art is always there from the time I was 6. You know, I'm writing short stories and reading them to mum in the kitchen or whatever. And then it kind of, you know, you transition into work. I think more than anything, you transition into a career, and then you choose when you transition and to what degree you transition back out of that into your natural state of creating. So it's more of a strategy of extracting yourself from that rather than transitioning into something. That's my feeling on it.
Yeah.
So before I started painting, so kind of like up until the end of high school, I considered myself more of a writer than a painter, and always assumed that when I left school I would be a novelist and I would write fantasy stuff.
Interesting.
And I chose art in the last year of high school because it had an immediacy to it, and I really liked getting reactions from people. You know, I had a sketchbook out or a painting done, and I could get a reaction from someone really quickly. They could take a quick look at it and say they liked it or they hated it. Whereas with writing, it was a matter of sitting them down for 10 hours to write a book. So as mundane as that sounds, I think that's why I chose the visual medium. But I feel like I'm still a writer, a non-writing writer. So the last couple of years, I've started focusing on my writing again and using my illustration as a way to justify that and integrate it with what I know. So I've developed a bit of a method of flowing between one and the other. So I write a bit, I write until I start to generate images, and then if I get stuck with the writing, I'll go to those images, start sketching those out, and then they'll kind of spur the writing idea again, and it sort of flows between the two.
Cool.
So there's the writing and the illustrating side, and then there's also just the kind of typical, well not typical, but you know, more traditional fine art stuff, which is plein air work, portraiture, all those kinds of things. But you know, I think the biggest struggle for a long time was just wanting to do everything, and then trying not to do everything and to force myself to choose what I wanted to do. And there was probably like a good 6-7 years of that like angst of, you know, doing one thing and feeling like I should be doing the other one, and doing that one feeling like I should be doing that. And I've just gotten to the point now, I believe in the last year, where I'm just accepting that I'm always going to be someone who wants to do everything. And so I'm just kind of embracing that rather than the path of mastery of one thing. So yeah, I guess now I see it all as just one big kind of interplay of all these different things that I do, some for money, some not, some, you know, on all these different degrees of the spectrum of how much ownership I have over them. But if anything, combining it all like that starts to make everything more personal and authentic, even the commercial work, because it starts to feed into that.
Very true.
And then I don't have to make that divide in my mind about, well, now I'm working and now I'm playing. You know, it's a little bit of both. All the time.
I think when you realize that your whole creative journey is sort of this comprehensive thing, that even if you're doing work for a client, and even if it's not the work that you love, it's still part of you, it's part of what you're producing, it's part of what you're creating.
I mean, there's quite a few artists, you know, in their biographies or in their journals or their notes or whatever, who say things along the lines of, at some point they discovered or they came to the conclusion that the real artwork that they were creating was themselves and them as an artist interacting with the world through all these different mediums, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's what I try and fall back on if ever I get a little bit confused about what my priorities are. Is this question of what does this actually do for me as a person, and what does this do for the world generally if I'm interacting with the world this way. And so sometimes the ethical or the decision that feels right for me may be a very commercial one, because I see where that's taking me and the kind of opportunities that will afford me to do other things. And so if I just look at it as a one-off thing, I could be making, you know, kind of selling out, making a bad decision. But I see it a little less emotionally than that now. It's kind of just this ability to roll with all these different decisions flowing into that same direction.
I mean, really, when
I mean, what about you with your personal work? Like, how do you find that balance?
I mean, I definitely agree, because, I mean, you can look at doing work for money as selling out, sure, but the way I look at working for money, and really just money in general, is money is just opportunity. That's really all it is. It's the opportunity and freedom to do whatever you want. And that's the reason I don't really have any qualms that a lot of people do have with money. It's because I don't see money as something that is just full of greed or whatever like that. I think it's really just a chance for me to do what I want and to do something good and do something, you know, personal and all that. So that's kind of how I look at doing the paid work, look at doing all the education stuff I do and whatnot. It's really just a means to an end. And I think some people get caught up in the fact that, you know, they're money-obsessed people, but that's a whole different issue. And so I definitely agree with you that it's an interesting interplay of everything that you do, because, you know, I do a little bit of writing as well as my painting and all that sort of stuff. And I'm realizing that all of a sudden all these different creative expressions that I'm interested in are all part of who I am and what I want to do. And I think they're all equally valid as well. You know, even though most people probably right now know me as, for instance, a digital painter, that's not all that I want to do or can do. And I think that's a really good thing to realize, is that all these different expressions that I might dive into, you know, if I start writing more than I start painting, that would be great. And, you know, even if I'm not quite as good at writing probably, you know, I'll figure it out eventually, hopefully. Otherwise I'll just have an awful book, or something like that. But we'll see how that goes. Good editor. Yeah, really good editor. Or just a ghostwriter, honestly. Just get a ghostwriter to write it, done with it. So we'll see if that happens. But yeah.
So, you know, let me ask you, like, when you're doing your personal work, you know, the writing and the illustrating that you're doing for Sin of Man and things like that, do you have a conscious sense of wanting to contribute something, or having an idea of a contribution or an effect that you would like that to have? Or is it something that just really you kind of don't think too much about where it's going to go and how it's going to get out there, and you're just more concerned with being authentic to whatever comes up that you feel compelled to create?
I think it's really a balance of the two, because I definitely think about, like, how I'll get it out there, how it's going to affect people, what I'm trying to, like, say to everyone. But at the end of the day, when I'm making decisions about it, or really just in general, I try to be as true to myself as I possibly can. And the whole project I'm trying to make as absolutely personal and real as I can. You know, the stories and the feelings and emotions and the whole, like, message that I'm trying to get across in the project is a very, very personal one. And it's things that, you know, I've gone through, I've experienced, I've felt. And I think that's really the only way I would know how to approach something like this. I don't pretend to have some theoretical masterpiece that I'm, you know, shaping here. I'm really just trying to create something that I am personally involved in, something that's wholly and entirely me. And that's really all I figure that I can do. And if I do that, you know, if people react to it, great. If they don't, whatever. At least it's me.
So do you think that maybe if you were to try and pin down a difference between sort of personal work and commercial work, I get the feeling, like, if I was to generalize amongst all my friends that have that balance, I would say that one of the differences is, I think with personal work, I find there's a lack of trying to consciously manipulate people's reactions. And I don't mean that in the sense of like bad guy manipulation, like, you know, we're manipulating their minds, but in the sense of, you know, if you're doing even a magic card or something like that, you're kind of thinking, you know, how am I going to put in these visual cues or these storytelling cues in order for the audience to read X, Y, Z story, content, emotion, whatever. Whereas with personal work, you kind of, you connect more with that emotion or that idea yourself, and then you just paint, and you kind of assume that the audience will get whatever they get from it. There's less of a conscious directing of their attention. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think it often comes out in more subtlety of expression, I guess would be the way to put it. In that my personal work, it definitely tells stories, it tells emotions, but it does so much more subtly. And I think the reason for that is it's really just coming out in through my subconscious and just like into the painting. And I imagine you could find the same thing yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because like when you're doing your personal work, you're putting yourself into it. And some of that's going to happen with paid work, with your commercial work, but to a much lesser degree. I mean, do you find the same thing with your stuff?
Yeah, I think it's, I have to really force myself to try and put something personal into my commercial work, and I think for a long time that just made the whole thing a much longer and more difficult, arduous process than it needed to be. So I tend to now remove the need to do that, and if it sort of spontaneously falls that way, then I'll go for it. If something, you know, if I read a brief and it just hits something that interests me personally, I'll spend a little bit more time on it, but I won't worry about making everything that way. I think one of the interesting dichotomies between commercial and personal work that really interests me is that the personal work that I do, I find much more compelling, and I think objectively speaking is more interesting by its nature, by the fact that there's enough time to go into these really interesting avenues of inquiry. But I've yet to find a way to present that in a medium that encourages sustained viewing. Whereas a lot of the commercial work I do, whether it's something that's going into a film or into a game that people play for hours at a time, they have these inbuilt models where people actually interface with that art for a long time. So, you know, you do a painting and you put it on the wall in a gallery and someone will walk past it and look at it for 10, 15, 20 seconds, a minute, maybe they come around again, and that's 2 minutes, you know. You do a land card for Magic and that's on the table in front of thousands of people for thousands of hours, you know. So I find that a really interesting, you know, contradiction there, and I would love to know, or love to develop into a way of really getting people to engage with fine art again in different ways. And I think obviously that's easier with writing a book. You know, they're going to do that. But I think in the visual medium, if you're not making a film or something like that, I think I'm really interested in finding out how we can encourage viewers to look at paintings for a long time again. And I remember, I think maybe it was Robert Henry or someone spoke about when somebody owns a painting, they buy a painting, they put it in their house, and they develop a relationship with it. So they'll put it in the hallway, and every day they come home from work and they'll walk past the painting, and every now and then they'll glance at it, and it'll be there, you know, year after year, and they kind of develop this, this interaction with it. And then one day they just kind of look at it and they go, oh yeah, that's why I feel that way about that. You know, they've grown into it. And I hope that tradition of deep looking into art can continue. And you know, in a world where everything is so you know.
You don't really experience it. And I find that I do it myself. You know?
Exactly.
When I look at art, I look at a painting for 5 seconds. And it's really sad. And I know that guy spent 20 hours on that painting, but I looked at it for 5 seconds. And I'm an artist. So you'd think I'd spend more time.
And I mean, that's one of the experiences that I find really fascinating, is going to an art gallery with somebody who's not a painter and watching the way that, you know, especially people of my parents' generation, and actually seeing them stop in front of a painting and be emotionally affected by it. You know, maybe not to the point of getting down on their knees and being in tears, but you know, they kind of tilt their head and you can see their body sort of reacts to a feeling. And you know, they'll say, oh, look at the dog in the painting, how loyal it is to its master or something. And I'm back here at like not even realizing there was a dog in the painting. You know, I'm looking at the highlights and the scumbling and the, you know, and I think that every time that happens, it's a reminder of what this is about,
right.
and putting yourself in the perspective of a viewer.
Yeah.
I think that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely go to galleries and I find myself looking at a painting for 10 minutes and not realize what the painting's of. I have no idea what the painting's of. But so I guess we're sort of getting to near the end of this thing. So let's talk a little bit about work-life balance. How do you balance having a life and working as an artist, and separating your art from your life or integrating it?
Definitely integrating it.
Yeah.
I think I kind of started out doing all of this in the kind of early days of conceptart.org and forums like that.
Sure.
And I remember at that time there was this real sense of like, I think there was even like a video where someone said draw or die. I think it was like a 6 month workshop or something like that. And I remember that kind of like trickled out into the consciousness, and there was this sense of like kind of manic possessive need to like, be productive all the time. And I remember people talking a lot about, sacrificing their weekends. Like, you got to sacrifice your weekends and stay in the dungeon and do this stuff. And that was all good, and I did that for a while. But I was pretty conscious of that trap of spending all of your time in front of the easel and not really having a life that brings experience that informs what you want to put on that easel. So I knew from the very beginning that I wanted to mold my art life around movement and around being free to live a full life. So from kind of the early days, back when I was doing D&D, from around then I found ways to travel, usually around half the year. Nice. So I would do things like I would travel to Bali, Southeast Asia, live there for 6 months as a way to actually, ironically, save money, because it's cheaper over there, and freelance from a laptop. And I moved from studio to studio, moved house when I needed to. I just kind of kept everything very light and flexible. And for me, I think that really defines everything that I do with my art. And I was talking to a good friend of mine recently about putting on an exhibition, putting on a solo show, and I was kind of tossing up what sort of work I wanted to put in it. And he said to me, if I look at everything that you do, and I actually share a studio with him, so he sees me every day, and he said, if I look at where you actually spend the majority of your time, unless you're on a deadline, it's sitting in a cafe with a sketchbook. And that of anything that I do is where I sink most of my hours. And that's not only drawing from life, but also just sitting there developing ideas, writing little stories, and just playing with those concepts. So that, if I was to sacrifice everything else and just continue being an artist with just a sketchbook and a ticket to the next town, I think I would be happy as Larry. So that balance of work and life for me is really dictated more by life than it is by work. Until such time as I have a kid or
then everything changes.
Real life things.
Once we're like responsible adults, I think things will change.
But I honestly I just couldn't do without that constant challenging really of my worldview, and I think that's what travel does for me.
Absolutely.
And not just travel, but also just being outside a lot, talking to lots of people, is it's constantly creating a friction between other people's views and your own views, and it's breaking down your assumptions, even just about artistically, not getting stuck in a trap of thinking that something's really good, because you go out and you show it to people and they might not even get what the hell you're talking about, or they don't understand it, or it looks really old-fashioned or whatever. So that constant sort of butting up against reality and redefining how you see the world, I think, is where I find my work-life balance.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, all the traveling I've done has been hugely influential in both my life and my art. I could not make the art that I'm making now having not done all that traveling. And had I not taken on this sort of worldview of things. Because I look at art, and on the one hand, yes, it's how I make my living, but it's also really just what my life is all about. The things that I do really all relate back to art, and it really just influences everything about what I do. And then I try to make sure, just like you, that I actually get to live a life. Because I see way too many people still with that draw or die attitude of, all right, I need to put in 12 hours a day on my tablet, or otherwise I'll just fail as an artist. And no, you won't fail as an artist.
Well, you know, I think it's kind of got something to do with people still having a separation between now I'm an artist, now I'm not.
Right.
And it's sort of like, and maybe that's maybe more prominent for people who work a part-time job or they're not working as artists yet.
Sure.
And so they feel like there are particular hours of the day when they are and aren't on. And I think you kind of get to a point after a while where you own the identity of being an artist, and it's no longer something that you have to consciously clock on and clock off.
Right.
It just becomes who you are.
Sure.
And then I think what happens after that is you realize that more than contributing paintings or books or these finished artworks, your contribution to the world is really you and how you interact.
Sure.
And I think that probably the most rewarding experiences for me are not, you know, things that I've finished and posted online and gotten lots of feedback for, or even magic cards. They're just like little interactions in a cafe or at a restaurant or on the street, where someone comes over and they see you drawing in your sketchbook, and you know they're a 50-year-old you know woman, and she says, "It's been years since I've done that. Like, I remember when I used to do that. It was so awesome, and I traveled through, you know, Turkey, and I kept all these sketchbooks." And they get this kind of twinkle in their eye again, you know, and they go, "I'm going to go and buy a sketchbook today and start drawing again," you know. And that moment for me is like, job done. I can go home, have a good night's sleep. You know, that's going to be more rewarding for me than any amount of praise of a painting on its aesthetic merits.
Yeah, I think it is those like small little moments that really change everything. Like for me, like with the teaching I do, it's not really the mass teaching that I do that's the most rewarding. It's those moments when I see a student figure something out. Because of maybe something I said or something I demoed or whatever. But they have that moment of, oh, that's how that works. And like that little moment, all of a sudden I'm happy. And
then all of that studio work that you do, all those grinds, you know, all those hours that you spend in there just working away on the technical stuff, becomes, you know, an end in itself, or the process becomes valuable, because that whole time that you're doing that, it's strengthening all of you. It's a holistic thing. It's making you a better person, you know, because you observe more deeply, you care more deeply. You know, you go out and you draw a tree or you spend time in nature, and it makes you care about the world more. And then you take that developed self out into the world, and you can actually make real change happen. You know, not just be an identity.
Yeah, exactly. And I think on this note, you know about it, but Sterling Hunley's new program, the Legendeering, awesome stuff that he's doing. I'm totally on board with what he's doing. I think it's a great direction for artists in the art world to do. I mean, it's great just seeing people getting out of their studios, experiencing life, connecting with nature, with people, real stories, and you know, getting out from behind, you know, a computer monitor.
And being proud of being an artist, but not in an arrogant way. It's just kind of owning that role, that archetype, and living it, really living it fully.
And understanding that even just calling yourself an artist doesn't mean you have to do paid work. I think that's something of a confusion for a lot of people. Is they think that, oh, I'm not a real artist until I'm doing magic work. I have to do magic work before I'm a real artist. And no, you're an artist when you make art. You might not be a great technical artist, but you're still an artist.
I mean, I think we're all artists when we're 5 or 6 years old. You know, we all have that spontaneous desire to create, and it's really just about staying an artist and not becoming one.
So I think if you just keep that attitude, it's really all where it's at. So cool. I think we're done. I'm Noah Bradley. Find my stuff at noahbradley.com or anywhere else on the internet. Adam?
I'm Adam Paquette, and you're probably better off just Googling my name, because I don't even know what websites are up and down at the moment.
And you have that weird
Facebook,
Australian,
Instagram, all that stuff.
Yeah, cool. So thanks. We'll see you next time. No idea who it'll be, but it'll be awesome. So cool.
Make art, have fun.
Yeah. See ya.
Alright, we decided to do some DVD extras. We forgot that you guys did ask some questions on Facebook. So we've got a little bit of time left, so we're just going to run through some of these questions quickly. So Razvan asks, what career advice would you have for someone who wishes to go directly into a career in fine art painting after college? Wouldn't have a clue. Neither of us, I would say, a career fine artist at this point.
No. I mean, I've done like some fine art, and you've done some fine art and made some sales, but
I I would say it probably depends on what you did in college.
Yeah.
If that was a fine art degree, I would be asking them, not us. If not, I would say probably just, take a look at what your weaknesses are and, start strategically tackling those one by one, and obviously go and meet some fine artists and ask those guys.
Yeah.
Jordan wants to know, when marketing your work, is it more beneficial to optimize your work towards the number of likes or the number of sales? From my experience, I'm not really an avid online marketer, but for me, likes don't mean anything at all. And in fact, a lot of my favorite stuff gets very few likes on Facebook.
Yep.
What about you?
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Don't worry about likes or attention too much.
Yeah.
It's really not all it's cracked up to be.
I think it can probably be really easy for that to sway you from what you really want to do as well. If you just constantly base your decisions on what other people like.
Yeah.
You're not gonna.
I mean, focus on what you want to do. I've had 25-hour paintings get a quarter of the likes of a 15-minute life drawing. So doesn't really matter. The most popular thing I've ever put on Facebook in my life is a 15-minute life drawing.
Yeah.
That's. Is it the best thing I've ever done? No. Did it get popular? Sure. I don't know. So don't worry about too much about that stuff. So.
Nick Beatrice wants to know, when you're working, do you prefer to have music, movies, or silence as ambient noise?
All.
All of the above. I can't do movies anymore. Music, yes, with headphones. Without, not so much. Silence is probably the deepest I've ever gone with painting, has been in silence. And that's usually actually listening to music, and then without realizing the music will stop, and then I'll just be so in the zone and there's nothing to kind of pull me out of it again. So, maybe try that, like give yourself a playlist that's like half an hour to an hour, and then just see what happens when the music stops.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that.
I think we answered Christy's question before about artistic expression. I mean, that's a whole nother can of worms, but Brad, what's the best advice you'd give to a college graduate with or without debt? What artists are good to have as far as book references, and what is a professional artist to you all?
We sort of answered the last one.
Yeah, I think so too. And as far as advice for a college graduate, I've never been one, so again, probably not the person to ask. I would say just like, make sure you fill that vacuum, because I would assume that after that long studying, there's probably going to be a sense of like, what the hell do I do now? Where do I go? Yeah. So you don't want to sort of let that go on long enough that you feel the need to run back to college or take a job that you don't want. So I would just put some kind of structure in place of self-study, or I really like I think it was Greg Manchester's idea of a no quota. Might have been Donato actually. Donato Giancola, I think, talks about having a no quota. So you start applying for jobs and you set yourself a certain number of rejections that you want to get every month, 10 rejections. And you just keep, applying to better and better jobs and getting knocked back.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice.
Getting used to that sense of knockback.
I'd also say go traveling if you just graduated.
Yeah.
If you didn't take a break year between high school and college, go take a break year right now and go travel. And
that doesn't mean you need to like go to some exotic place far away. You can just like, do a road trip or go one state over.
But just honestly spending a few months even traveling will do wonders for your life and your art and everything.
Yeah. Book reference?
I've got my list that I recommend to everyone. Just Google Noah Bradley art books and ta-da.
Alla Prima, Richard Schmidt.
Yeah, basically just that.
We don't need to answer Eric's question, clearly. Any tips or resources for starting to oil paint? I would say don't let the cost be a barrier to entry. Start with a limited palette. Have a look at artists like Sargent and Zorn, who used primarily 4 colors, or red, yellow, black, white, 4 colors. You really only need a handful of objects to start oil painting. 1 or 2 brushes, something to paint on, some paint, and a solvent. I guess. So just start. Just get on with it.
That's definitely. I just did the art camp demo for oil painting, and that's basically what I tell everyone. Is yes, you can spend $800 on your oil painting setup, and that's great. And you can buy all the cadmium you want, but you can also get started with oils with a very, very cheap setup and have a lot of fun with it. And that's where I'd suggest everyone start. Because you won't get any more benefit out of having a full palette than a limited palette for a long time.
Kirsty wants to know the best way to get traditional art supplies. online local stores. I would say whoever's got the best prices. The only caveat to that being, if you do have someone in your area that makes art supplies, here in Melbourne we have Langridge, and they make some really good oils and oil mediums and things like that. If you ever get the chance to go and actually talk to a chemist about that stuff, it's a really awesome thing to do. And they can explain things like, you know, the permanence of different dyes and pigments and organic versus synthetic and all that sort of stuff. So if you get the chance to go to a local store that actually has that knowledge, I would say definitely do that, and support them even if it costs a little bit more. Otherwise, you know, an online retailer like Blix or something like that is what I would usually do.
That's where I get most of my stuff.
Sebastian, recent advice to a recent art school grad with a lot of debt. As an illustrator, where's the money at? Where's the money at? What skills should students focus on in order to enter those higher paying jobs?
The money is in advertising.
Advertising?
That's it.
Yeah.
If you really want money, go into advertising. Get an agent and go into advertising.
Yeah, I'm actually going to give the travel answer again. I wasn't in a lot of debt, but I did know that I wasn't going to earn a lot of money. And so I actually chose a place, I chose to travel to Southeast Asia and live really inexpensively.
Yeah.
More generally than that, I would say adopt an attitude of, rather than just increasing your income, lower your expenses. Find any way that you can to actually minimize your overheads and your outgoings, and just see how frugally you can live without it impacting your ability to create.
Yeah.
I would say, you know, not to do that, not to sacrifice food and health, because that's really going to be a kick in the guts later on. And I think, you know, it's worth finding a way to eat as healthy as you can.
Yeah.
That'll pay dividends in the long run.
Yep.
But otherwise, you know, you don't need to buy TVs and cars and shit.
There you go.
I was about to answer my own question then. What else we got here? What freelancing site would you recommend for work? I've been a magic dude for so long, I haven't really looked for work.
I mean, honestly, the freelancing sites are awful, because like the freelancing jobs you get on there are like $5 jobs. So honestly, the best I've had back in the day when I was actually looking for work was basically cold calling people through email, as in like sending emails to a bunch of art directors. Just have a list of like 50 art directors that you want to work for and just send emails.
Yep.
And that's probably the best bet.
And if you can, if you're able to go to conventions or anything like that, I'd say, you know, just start that process of networking. You don't have to be too ruthless about it. I mean, it's also called making friends, I believe, in some countries. You know, just start that process of meeting other artists, meeting other art directors, all that kind of thing. Question for Noah: how on earth do you manage to stay in shape and do art, buddy?
I just don't paint. All I do is work out. I never paint. Adam does all my paintings for me. That's why we paint the exact same thing.
Essentially, secret's out. He does all my work out for me. Do you want to actually answer that question? I mean, it's something that I've struggled with, for sure. I've never really been able to get into the discipline of staying super fit. I kind of have phases.
Honestly, I do too. It's something I've gone on and off with, and this is probably one of the longer stretches I've actually been on for, and it is difficult. It's something where I have to force myself into it almost, or trick myself rather.
Yeah.
But I have read some really good books on habit development, and I think that was one of the things that helped spur it along, in that basically to develop a habit, you don't just do something again and again and again and again, because that won't actually develop a habit. You need to give yourself a trigger to make it happen during the day, and you also need a reward system at the end, something that feels like it's like you working for that little tick mark, whatever it is. So I've tried to sort of manage things like that that kind of help to develop that habit.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, the only other thing that I would offer is, you know, don't overcomplicate it. Like it has to be this gigantic chunk out of your day, and you've got to choose between making art or doing this. You know, just like halfway through a painting, just drop and do 20 push-ups. You know, and just kind of get into the habit of biting off little chunks here and there. And also finding something that you enjoy doing for fitness rather than just like some brutal gym routine.
Yeah, I think that's really a key thing. Is that like I've tried to do workout stuff that I didn't enjoy in the past. Like I tried to run. I hate running. Running is my least favorite thing in the world.
Yeah.
And it never worked for me. And so I found something that I really enjoy doing. And whatever that is for you, just go for that. And like, for a lot of my like college life, that was like playing a sport of some kind. And I was in great shape because I just play sports all the time. And it's a blast. But you're getting exercise. So that's the way to go about it.
Alright, we should probably just answer one or two more. So let's have a look here. Do you want to answer this one?
I can answer it quickly.
The tax write-off one?
Yeah. Can a self-directed art education count as a tax write-off in the U.S.? I do not believe so. For most tax write-offs, you're writing it off as a business, and the U.S. government doesn't really appreciate write-offs unless you're actually earning an income. And if you do that for more than a year or two, you will get audited, and they probably won't be too happy with you. There might be some education things you'll look into, but as a business, no, you cannot write it off until you're making money. Then you can write it off everything.
Awesome. Alright, that's probably all we got time for. So,
cool.
Thanks.
Yeah.